Thank you everyone for coming. This is going to be a nice little talk on V-Ray with savings and quality in mind. My name is Paul Ghezzo. I'm from ZOIC Studios. I'm the CG supervisor. We, for those of you who don't know us, we create visual effects and animation for commercials, video games, feature films, and episodic TV. We started using V-Ray late last year, mid to late last year, and to date we're using V-Ray for our 3D rendering almost exclusively. This is one of the shots from this Friday's release of 30 minutes or less. The car and the majority of the foreground, with the exception of the two actors, is completely V-Ray render. I wish I had a complete sequence to show you, but I've got a handful of stills, so we'll get into those as well in a little bit here. But yeah, between feature film work, video games or commercials, even video games per se, a lot of cutscenes, we pretty much do it all. And V-Ray has been a complete game changer for our studio. It saved us countless hours and time and money, obviously, as it all boils down to it. So really the question is what do you want from your render engine? Well, the answer on that is you want it to deliver the very best quality image in the least amount of time and in the most cost-effective way. So what goes into making a render? Well, there's a number of things that really go into making a render. I mean, if you think about it, right? You need your artist, crazed, maniacal or not. You need hardware, you need your workstation. Now, hopefully something a little bit more powerful than this. You also need your 3D render application of choice, whether it's you know, Max, Maya, Cinema 4D, preferably something that uses V-Ray. And you need lots and lots of storage. A couple of boxes might do, right? But in all actuality, nowadays we're talking about terabytes, petabytes. I mean, storage is kind of a big issue if you're talking about large production. Render farm, you know, if you're doing a lot of work, you need a render farm. It only makes sense. You also need electricity. I mean, electricity can be a pretty big issue if you're thinking about your render farm. And you need energy for your artists, right? Caffeine goes a long, long way. Now, what about render application? Well, you're saying that every 3D application comes with its own inherent built-in renderer. Well, that's true, but if you think about a good renderer, like V-Ray, this will save you a ton of time, a ton of money, and in this case, I think just about every application I've seen it in will give you a better, cleaner, and faster render than a lot of the built-in renderers. And you need support for that artist, right? Tech support, not just talking about network stuff, but when it comes down to the render application per se, if you've got a question, you need an answer. Sometimes it makes a lot more sense to email the developers and say, hey, something I think is broken, or maybe I'm not doing it right. So it's important to have all these things, and if you think about all the costs that go into it, it can be pretty daunting. I mean, electricity is one thing, but really it's the hardware. I mean, how many thousands or tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars can you actually put into a render farm, or your hardware, or your software, or even just, you know, cases and cases of soda, right? So if you think about it, what you need is a render engine that's easy to use, something you can get somebody up to speed fast on, something that's affordable, expendable, so you don't want to get you know, caught buying one license and then realizing that it's going to cost you a lot more to get many other licenses. You want it to quick. You want your renders in an expedient, really fast, efficient you know, amount of time. Preferably something that supports EXR or compressed file format. And obviously, you want your render to give you the best quality image possible. Now, a render engine with all these qualifications will save you money. It'll pay for itself, hands down. I mean, it's really just that simple. And let me sort of break it down for you from there. It's going to save more than just a penny or two, okay? And if you think about it, Abe Lincoln, he was probably like America's probably first producer. He was quoted by saying, give me 6 hours to cut down a tree. I'll spend the first 4 sharpening my axe. I think nowadays we just say, you know, hey, you know, work smart, not hard. Pretty much straight up, V-Ray helps you work with all these things, right? It helps you work smart. So far we've got, with V-Ray, we've got a money-saving, intelligence-enhancing render engine. Now, I don't know about you, I didn't see that on the spec sheet, but with all honesty, it does all these things for you. So let me tell you a little story. Well, before I get into this render here, when it comes down to artist and training, if it's straight out of the box, honestly, you want your artist to sit down, or if you're the artist, you want to be able to sit down and start rendering something. You want to, apply textures, apply shaders, get the lighting in there, be fast, efficient, and make it look right and good. From my experience, you can take any 3D artist who's, even a modicum worth of experience on the box, and they will be proficient in V-Ray in a day's time, possibly two. And I'm not talking about all knowledgeable, I'm not talking about a guru in the software, but I'm saying proficient. They can create a nearly photorealistic render in a day's time. It's really pretty much that straightforward. To give you an idea, this is a render that came out of a studio that I worked for back in 2006, before I started at ZOIC. We won a job. It was a Nissan commercial spot to texture, light, animate, and render every one of Nissan's lineup. This is cars, trucks, SUVs, minivan, in a 30-second commercial in an all-CG environment, an all-CG city. And what we were given was 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, I was also given 8 artists. A couple of them were lightwave artists who had never touched Max or V-Ray before. A handful of them were architectural previs artists who hadn't even seen a render farm before. So I had a very junior crew for the most part when it came down to commercial production. What we did is we turned out this commercial, 30 seconds worth and 6 versions worth, as in 6 different variations on this commercial spot, all within the 3 weeks with this very junior crew and very junior knowing Max and V-Ray as well. In part, another shot from it, in part it was because of the presets. V-Ray has some fantastic presets. These are textures and shaders combined with the lighting systems that they have. The lighting algorithms in V-Ray are just extraordinary. Practically plug and play for near photorealistic results right out of the box. But with the presets, with the lighting, you can literally apply a couple of different texture shaders to your objects, whether it's chrome or automotive paint, put in a dome light or even an IBL image-based lighting, and you will have a fantastic result like this in close to no time. So storage. A lot of people don't really think about it, but at ZOIC, when we were using another render engine, Menelray, to be specific, we often had to render in uncompressed TIFF files, which could pretty much run you about 20 megs for HD per frame. Now, if you think about it, you add on top all of your different buffers, your matte passes, everything else. Could be 10 or 20 different passes on top of it to get the final result that you want out of comp. You're now talking about 200 megabytes or so, roughly. These are all just kind of estimates that that will take up per frame of content. Now you multiply that by 1,440, which is 24 frames per second at 60 seconds, right? You're talking like a 60-second commercial. You're talking about about a little over a quarter of a terabyte worth of data, and that's for one render, one single pass with its buffers. Now you're talking about, you actually have somebody who's cranking out versions and versions of the shot, then now you're talking about terabytes worth of data that's just stacking up. So it really makes sense to go with a compressed file format like an EXR. V-Ray completely supports and utilizes the compressed EXRs to the point that you can have that same 288 gigabytes will compress down to about, in an OpenEXR with all the passes, with all the buffers, about 58 gigabytes. So you're talking about, a quarter the size. That's a substantial savings when you really start talking about multiple productions, multiple renders, multiple passes. Buffers. Now, V-Ray has the built-in buffer system. This helps compositors do what they need to in comp. And these are a multitude of predetermined passes that can be easily added to a render, all encompassed, encapsulated into that same EXR file. As well as texture or geo object-based mats, which you can determine, you can dictate exactly what it is that you want to come out as those mats. All these things can be rolled into that same EXR render. So from that 30 minutes or less shot, this is a single frame with a number of buffers that all came out in that same render. I mean, it's everything from an occlusion pass, incidence angle, matte passes, for tire rubber, chrome, car paint. These are more object IDs. There's a scratch pass for the textures. And all these passes, diffuse passes, you name it, all kind of boil down in normal passes as well, and gives the compositor as much munition as they need to actually sit there and step up and massage that image to whatever, to whatever extent. And again, it's all incorporated into that one EXR render. So also, if you think about it, artist frustration, take one step back here, artist frustration, I mean, you can't really put a price tag on that, right? You've got people that are working sometimes very, very long hours, people tearing their hair out, making mistakes. Occasionally you'll have people that will start rendering with the wrong file name or to the wrong location. Now your compositors are sitting there looking for the frames, wasting time, wasting money. Well, again, so with that single EXR file, now you're talking about one place, one file. People don't have to go hunting for it. You're becoming even more proficient. You're saving even more money. Now, ZOIC took jump over here. So reading and writing time. With all these buffers and all these mats, you think that it's going to take much longer to render all this into that EXR, and it really doesn't. It's almost negligible. In many cases, it's a couple seconds. I don't think I've even seen it hit a minute on full HD renders. So you don't have to set up your additional, like in Maya, you don't have to set up your additional render layers to get those additional passes out. It all just comes out of the buffer exporter, and it doesn't add that much in render time. So to thinking about time and savings and reading and writing time, ZOIC took a 2-month slice of production. We calculated up about 200,000 frames. And in reading and writing time alone, we found that it would save us thousands of dollars in overhead. Now this is countless hours lost of writing time, conversion time, just reading, onlining, uploading. All this was saved with V-Ray. It was, again, it was that compressed EXR. So alone, that's pretty impressive. Render times. Now, we've clocked our renders taking about 3/4 the amount of time that Mental Ray took. Without transparency or motion blur issues that we did have with Mental Ray, V-Ray knocked it out in 3/4 the amount of time. Literally, it was a 48-minute render in Mental Ray. We did it in about 31 minutes. And this was everything, all these buffers, all these matte passes included in that one render. You didn't have to wait for additional render layers to render out. And that alone is also another, savings point. You don't have to get your artist to create those additional render layers. It was all pretty much, gratis. It was in there. It was given. Now, one of the other things is, what's the longest you've ever had to wait for render time? Well, I think some of us have some pretty crazy render times, whether it's, I don't know, 4 hours, 10 hours, 30 hours, a couple days, whatever it boils down to. But really, honestly, I think that answer is when you're up against the wall, when you're sitting there, you're waiting for that last frame to render to roll off of the farm. The rest of the shot, everything else rendered, but that one processor on the farm has just been taking forever, right? Well, with distributed rendering, you can take a shot, and what distributed rendering does is you dedicate a number of machines as if you dedicated the entire farm to the shot. And what it'll do is it'll render each one of these squares on its own processor. So normally if you've got a quad-core machine, you might have 4 buckets or 4 of these squares rendering at one time, and then it'll move on when they're done, I'm gonna move on. A frame like this might take you an hour or something to render. But if it's a couple of minutes at a time, a couple of minutes per square, what you're looking at is you get 50 or 100 processors running on this. You could be done in a couple of minutes. So all of a sudden, instead of waiting for that hour, the hour duration for that one frame to render, you could be done in probably 5 to 10 minutes, and be done with it and move on. Now, V equals Q. This is probably one of the simplest equations you may see at this this convention. This is one of my equations. Versions equal quality. How many times have in production we have to tweak something, render it, and then repeat? Tweak, render, repeat, tweak, render, repeat. It's just part of production. Whether an art director decides to choose something, change something, the client, an artist, you have to get back into it and make decisions on exactly what it should be. So you find yourself rendering. Now there are two ways to really get more versions. You either have more render power, a larger render farm, or you have faster renders. Now, to give you an idea, ZOIC Studios put V-Ray into production in late 2010. In November, I should say mid-2010, in November we had one of our banner months. We rendered 2.2 million frames of full HD content. This is over 20 simultaneously running productions. And this was also a mixed V-Ray and mental ray pipeline. It was a fantastic month. A lot of things. It was kind of a culmination month where everything was just coming together and all rendering out at the same time. Now this past April, we do a lot of episodic TV, and we had our pilots month. Now, this is sort of a hell week for football, but it's a month long. A lot of artists working a lot of long hours. We're putting everything, everyone's pressured to get as much done as they possibly can. And we had 29 simultaneously running productions, and we were almost exclusively V-Ray at this time. This is running feature films, commercials, a huge game project, and several episodic shows. And we rendered over 5 million frames of HD content. Now, this is 5 million frames of compressed EXR content. So if you think about all those buffers rolled into it, even if you just quadruple it, you're talking about 20 million frames. This is versions. Versions equal quality. What you want to do is you want to be able to crank out as many versions as you can, not, needlessly cranking them out, but being able to do it in a quick manner and get the quality you're looking for is going to get you a higher bar. You're going to raise that bar. Your clients are going to look at it and go like, oh, yeah, every time we see a new render, it looks beautiful, it looks clean, it looks fantastic. So V equals Q. Versions equal quality. Render, render, render. So customer service. This is one of those things too that I think a lot of people take for granted. Okay, I'm a big fan of customer service. If I have a problem, I want to call somebody and I want to get an answer. I can sit there and I can spend countless hours trying to research it myself. And what's my time cost? What's that cost to the company? Well, I can also send an email out to somebody who may know the answer, in this case the developer, and I can usually get an answer. Now, with Chaos Group, customer service and tech support is extraordinary. Since my introduction to V-Ray in 2006, I've come to find that in every and any circumstance that we had an issue, whether it was something that we were doing wrong and they corrected us, or there was an issue in the code, whether it was a beta, they would turn around a coded fix for us and post it to us within a day. This meant that production can keep on going. How many times have you tried to figure out something and you spent days on end trying to make it work? Well, Chaos Group has just been extraordinary in that regards. In April, with our 29 productions going on, we had issues. We were running the beta, but we also managed with them, in a day's time, to get things fixed and turned around and be completely back, in full production. One of the other things that Chaos Groups boasts is nightly builds. If you're running the beta, they'll have a nightly build up there that will give you the latest and greatest, rendering application all the bells and whistles. And if you don't want to change horse in midstream, they also offer weekly stable builds, so that you know, with good faith that you can move on to this next build and not harm your production or not risk messing up the production. So with V-Ray, with all their customer service and their tech support, you can pretty much be on the cutting edge of rendering at all times. So in conclusion, using V-Ray will save you render time. It'll save you I/O time, input output time, storage space, tons of storage space, as well as artist frustration, which obviously you can't put a price tag on that. It'll speed up productivity, and most importantly, it renders a really beautiful image. That's it. Thank you. Thank you for coming.